Welcome to another Chester Historical Society moment. I'm standing here today in front of the Chester Public Library and the Chester Post Office. And if you happen to be new to town and don't know the story, how the town acquired these two buildings, come on inside the Historical Society and I'll tell you the story.
This photo hangs inside the Chester Library. Ruth Ray did a wonderful thing for this town, and in her will, she left everything to the town of Chester, which included Webster's store and the grain barn, and $250,000. It stipulated in her will that the money had to be used toward children's books. This trust fund created over $27,000 plus in interest per year, and got to the point where too many books and not enough room. So the town petitioned the courts to be able to use the interest for 10 years to rebuild the barn into the library what it is today. This photo, taken in 1905, shows on the right Webster Brothers store, which is now the post office, and on the left, the grain barn to the store, which is now the Chester Library. This is a photo of George Webster, Ruth Webster's father. The young girl in this photo is Ruth Webster, and this is Ruth Webster's sister Blanche with Ruth. I'm guessing the one on the left is Ruth. Ruth was a teacher. She taught for 17 years, 10 of which was in Chester. I read an article in an old newspaper that said she also taught in East Hampstead. The Historical Society has her teacher's certificate. It says, having passed the required examination and proof of fitness to respective age, character, and education. In the 1900s, early teachers did not need a college education to teach in rural settings. Women could not be married. Ruth taught in a one-room schoolhouse. The certificate says 1914, so that means she started teaching at age 24. Ruth Webster met Herbert Ray, which was from Auburn. They married in 1926. This is a photo of George Webster, Ruth's father, and Ruth's new husband, Herbert Ray, standing in front of the Webster store, which is now the post office. This is a photo of Sam, Herb's father, in his slaughterhouse. He also owned a pool house out of his home. The next photo is a photo of them together when Herb was younger. This 1940s photo shows Herb in the store. There was a potbelly stove. You could buy flour by the bag or the barrel, grain and animal feed in the barn. Molasses was sold from kegs and poured into customers' own jugs. And there was a pickle jar. Thank you, John Coleman, for sharing your memories of Herb Ray and his death.
Okay, this is the story of Herb Ray, husband of Ruth Ray, who was so good to the town when she passed away. Herb was born in Auburn, New Hampshire in 1891. Moved to Chester at age 7 and died here November 8th in 1972. During his stay here in Chester, he took part in everything that he could. He was a representative from Chester to the General Court. He was a selectman. He was in the Chester Grange for 50 years. He had the first gas station in Chester. I'm not sure you'd call it a gas station, but he sold gas down on the Raymond Road where he had his business. He had a franchise, automobile franchise where he sold cars, and I believe he was selling cars right up until the day he died. In 1931, he entered entered into a partnership with Robert C. Hazelden, selling Fords and tractors. I guess Herb didn't stay in the partnership very long, but RC went from Fords into construction equipment, and the company lasted up into the 2000s. Herb was very good to the people in town. Growing up, I heard of several instances where he helped out people that were in need. Herb was kind of a, I don't know, eccentric guy, but he loved to talk. I can remember many individuals, my father being one of them, that would stop down on Raymond Road and visit with him. Paul Assad was another one that spent a lot of time with Herb. Herb sold many cars to the people in town here, giving them a break. My own father was one of them. I know of 3 cars that Dad bought from Herbert Ray. My wife, when she was real young, bought a car from Herbert Ray. So he took part and lived a full life here in Chester. On November 8th in 1972 was election night here at the town hall. I don't recall why I stepped out, probably just to get a drink, but I went across the street, or was heading across the street to Spollett's Market then. And all I remember is that for the time it was dark, and I mean very dark. And I saw Herb, and then the next thing I know, I saw Herb in the air. A car coming from the Raymond Road hit Herb right at the entrance to the old road that used to come up in front of the hall. And he landed down somewhere around the fire hydrant, which is a pretty lengthy trip to take in the air. I ran over and checked on him, and obviously, to me, he was unconscious and hurting. So I ran across to Spollett's, called the ambulance in Derry, came back, and I don't recall who I asked, but I wanted to make sure that nobody else hit us. And I sent him up to the top of the hill at the Four Corners to slow the cars down coming from Raymond. I then pulled Herb to the side of the road the best I could. Herb was a big man, and like a lot of the old timers then, dressed in heavy wool clothes. And I felt his legs, and I could tell then that he had compound fractures of his legs, and he was a hurting man. He had a heavy old jacket on, more like a parka, and I could tell that every time I even moved him at all, he was groaning. He never recovered consciousness that I'm aware of, and I still believe to this day that he died in my arms right there.
The Historical Society is lucky enough to have several wonderful items of Ruth Ray's in the museum that you can come see. One of the items is her wedding announcement, and it says, Mr. George Webster announces the marriage of his daughter, Ruth Natalie, and I didn't realize her middle name was Natalie, to Mr. Herb Wasson Ray on Tuesday, December the 29th, 1926 in Chester, New Hampshire. Also, we're lucky enough to have her engagement ring and her wedding band. There was a great collection of stick pins. There's a thimble of hers. And there is, I love this. This is a mustard seed. He who has as much faith as a mustard seed can move mountains.
After Ruth's father died, she inherited the store and the grain barn. Ruth was postmistress for a quarter of a century for Chester from 1935 to 1960. Here is a photo of Ruth with Victor Smollett. Vic was a rural route carrier. She retired in 1960, where she spent her remaining years on the porch of the house where she was born, talking with townspeople who went by. Thank you, Kevin Scott, for sharing your memories of Ruth Ray.
How long people, or you can judge people on how long they've been in town by how much they remember about Ruth Ray. And I remember as a child her being the postmistress, I guess you'd say, in the same building that the post office is located now. And it was truly the old style post office with the wooden finish and the graded counter where you went to buy your stamps. And Ruth Ray was our postmaster. And we didn't get up here that often. I grew up on the Dairy Road. We didn't get up to town very often, but when I did, that was a memory that I had of going to the post office and seeing Ruth. After she retired and the post office moved over to what was the old hardware store, I have memories of her sitting on her porch and just watching the town go by. And I can remember one spring, I was up on the northern end of Lane Road, and I happened upon, I don't even remember why I was there, but I happened upon a patch of mayflowers. And I thought, I had just come by and I knew Ruth was sitting on her porch, and I picked a handful of mayflowers and I stopped on my way home and I gave them to her. And she was so moved, she said, "You're not gonna believe this." She said, "Today's my birthday." And I thought, well, how cool is that? And to this day, whenever I see a patch of mayflowers, I think of that story. I remember Ruth Ray that way. But my other memory is after she passed, and they had the auction here and sold they sold everything that was in the barn and everything that was in the house was sold. And of course, the back of what was the post office back then was where they had all of the general store merchandise stored, and it had been stored there since Webster Brothers had their store. So there was old boxes of old things that were brand spanking new. And I actually bought a bedroom set, 2 beds, a bureau, and a dresser, and a mirror. And at the time I was living up on Chester Street with my wife and boys, and actually took that bedroom set home, set it up, and my boys slept in it that very night. So, and we still have it. We still have that bedroom set. So it's kind of, those are my memories of Ruth Ray. She was just a very nice lady. Of course, after they remodeled the post office and remodeled the library, I was still on the volunteer fire department, and one day the fire alarm went off upstairs in the post office, which is where the living quarters were for the Webster family, where Ruth grew up. And the key for upstairs was in the Knox box at the library. There were a bunch of young fellas on the fire department, and I was at the post office. They brought the truck up, and I said, "Well, go get the key for upstairs from the Knox box." And they went over and they opened the Knox box on the library, and they came back and said, "We can't find it." And I said, "Well, I know the key is there." I said, "Go back and look again." And they did, and of course the alarm was still going off, and they couldn't find it. I went over, and there was the key, and the tag said, "Ruth Ray, upstairs." And I thought to myself, these guys don't even know who Ruth Ray was, much less that the key to Ruth Ray upstairs went to this building upstairs. So those are my memories. And like I say, if you remember Ruth Ray, if you remember her as a postmaster, you've lived in Chester a long time.
Ruth and Herbert Ray and Ruth's father are buried in the village cemetery in Chester. The one thing that I would like you to take away from this video is the kindness of Ruth Ray to have donated both buildings for use for the Chester Post Office and the Chester Library, but also the $250,000 that she left to the town, which in 1970s was a lot of money. Thank you for watching.